Well, that's Brian Billick. He's old enough to remember this. Look at him with his Titleist lid on. I mean, golly day, boy. You back in the Buckeye State now, right? After a summer in Minnesota?
Better believe it. Just got done with a golf lesson, and we're still whacking away here.
All right. Do you believe that was that America actually landed on the moon with fellow Ohioans, Neil Armstrong, John Glenn, et cetera, or do you think that was staged in a studio somewhere?
You know what? My son-in-law thinks that. He did a whole dissertation in college on how it was a fake moon landing. No, I'm afraid maybe I'm just naive, but I really believe we went to the moon.
Absolutely. All right, I want to ask you, before we get into some specifics, 6 weeks into the NFL season, is there anything for you that jumps out that surprised you, good, bad, indifferent, anything you sort of noticed, whether there's trends in the league, situations that are going on in the league, anything, one or two things that stand out for you so far?
Well, just the parity in the league. I mean, for a while, in the NFC, it looked like San Francisco and Philly were just going to run away with it, and nobody was going to beat them. Certainly Kansas City in the AFC and Buffalo. But what we have found is that even those really good teams, and they are really good teams, and they're likely to be the teams standing there at the end when we get through the championships. But everybody's got some warts. Buffalo has been really surprising. Josh Allen has looked absolutely spectacular. But then he has two games, the opener and last week, where he kind of looks pedestrian. Kansas City looks like they have a few flaws, aren't quite putting up the big plays and the scores they had before. And we saw last week with both Philly and San Francisco, they're human. They got their formulas down. They're going to play balanced. They're going to run the ball. They're going to have big plays, but they are beatable. So, that group clustering the top in the AFC, that's got to be Kansas City. Surprisingly or not, depending upon your point of view, with Miami being there, Jacksonville's kind of rebound. Buffalo's still going to be there. In the NFC, I think you have to now include Detroit. Who'd have thought we'd ever say that they look like they have some. Dan Campbell's done a great job in developing some consistency and belief. So if there's one trend, it's that this thing, and it's exciting, is truly wide open.
All right, I want to get into something very specific around here that people, not only this year because of the start of the season, Bengals started 0-2, they started 1-3, now they bounced back to get to 3-3. But even last year, Brian, frequently it's been brought up about play calling. Now, that goes on everywhere. You know that when you were calling plays in your offensive coordinator days with Minnesota. When you came to Baltimore, did you continue to call plays when you were the head coach? I can't believe I'm asking you this question and I don't know the answer to it all the time we've been together.
I went in and out of it. I began, because again, you get these jobs because of a perceived, competence on one side of the ball or the other. And what we did in Minnesota, my background offensively, the first year I did call it because I felt like I had to get the coaches and the team integrated to what I wanted. But then after that, I turned it over to Matt Cavanaugh. Later on, late when I had Jim Fossil, I had to relieve Jim of his duties, God rest his soul, and took it back over, which frankly is not a good thing because eventually that's going to catch you. When you're the head coach, you're responsible, and it's 16 wins and beyond and all that. When you're also the play caller, and I obviously in Cincinnati, he's got to deal with this a little bit. Now you're being questioned. Your competence is being questioned directly on 1,200 calls a year. And it could be a mentality. It's like Staley down in San Diego, or it's not San Diego, with the Chargers. He's a defensive guru. He gets the job, and he's calling the defense now. And now they're questioning that. Well, if you can't even do that, should you be the head coach? So there is some peril with it. I can make a case either way as to whether you should or you shouldn't. My only point is, if you're the head coach and you're calling the plays, then who's doing the other things? Because it's kind of funny. You look at this and you're a play caller, you're an offensive coordinator. It's all consuming 24/7. It's all you think about. And then you get a head job and you think, well, I can do the head job thing too. I can do what I've been doing that has been 24/7, all encompassing, but I can do those. Well, no, you can't. So at some point there has to be a balance between, well, I call it the 3 a.m. rule. When you wait, you're close to my age. We all wake up about 3 and do what you got to do. Well, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about, do I put the fullback in the flat? Do I do this at that depth? Well, if you are, then who's the one thinking about, well, do I make this roster move? What do we need at this, the schedule, all those other things that the head coach has to do. So, it's a legitimate question about those guys that are the head coaches and call their plays, and they're brilliant at it. They're good at it until they're not, and then it really brings into question, well, should you be the guy?
Bill Belichick. We wondered for years and years, was it Belichick? Was it Brady? Was it the combination of the two? Now, all of a sudden, Brady leaves. He wins a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay. Obviously, has since retired a couple of times. But boy, this New England thing is bad. Where do you see this going?
It's a good question because clearly Mac Jones is not the answer. And that's fair. That happens. At Bill Belichick at what's Bill, 70, 71?
Yep.
Do you really want to jump in now with what is, okay, we're going to take a quarterback next year. You know what that development is. You know the time frame on that and going forward. Do you really want to jump on with that? That, to me, is the big question. Obviously, he's a brilliant coach. Do you need to change a venue? It's hard to imagine saying that with a Bill Belichick who's been absolutely brilliant and is going to get slam dunk into the Hall of Fame. But sometimes, every coach is susceptible to that. And that's not to diminish Bill Belichick as an absolute Hall of Fame coach. Having Tom Brady certainly was an asset. And you can't deny that. Now that they're struggling, it's, well, okay, it was all Brady and Belichick isn't a good coach. Well, that's not fair either. That neither of those is true. But the world in the NFL is, believe me, Todd, I've lived it. You either have a quarterback, and if you don't, you're just not as good a coach.
Well, speaking of quarterbacks, I frequently reflect back to your book among a few that you've written, but the one chapter about drafting a quarterback. And this year, I don't know if I've ever seen a quarterback that had the success he had at the college level, but as we got closer and closer to the draft, he was just shredded for one reason or another in the press. And I'm talking about C.J. Stroud, right? What this kid did against Georgia in the national semifinal last year, and you look at all the other intangibles now, and I'm not saying this because I'm an Ohio State fan. I'm just saying to myself, are you kidding me? Who's going to be shredding this guy? And then the stuff leaks out about, what he do on the test and all this sort of nonsense. There's no question, is there, Brian, that he's the best of the lot at least through 6 weeks?
Yeah, well, let's begin with the fact that, yes, you are a Ohio State homer.
Yes, I am. Apologist.
If you have to qualify it, then yes, you're an apologist. No, and all these guys, it's very typical that, and as we wrote about in the book, there's absolutely no reason why the top three guys that were drafted with Richardson and Stroud and Young, they all have the qualifications to play and be great in the NFL. History will tell us that one, maybe two of the three aren't going to make it. It's the fact. It just doesn't translate. And we did what we typically do. They have all these credentials coming in, and then the closer you get to the draft, more people want to pick them apart. Mainly to kind of cover their backside, even if they do take them, to say, well, I did tell you that, he grows his fingernails a little long. And so they want to have that little qualifier in the back end. But there's no reason all of these guys shouldn't be successful. You're right. C.J. Stroud has looked, obviously, of all of them, very, very good. Now, he's still under 60% completion percentage. But we talked about many times, Tom, Bill Walsh really felt like you're going to know by the 24th, 25th start of a young quarterback whether he's the guy or not. It may happen earlier, but if he's not that guy by that time, then he's not. Now, certainly C.J. Stroud, and again, how do you separate what's going on around him from what the quarterback's actually doing? What's going on around him obviously needs a lot of work as well. But C.J. Stroud certainly looks like it's not too big for him. Richardson, we don't know.
Yep.
because he's been hurt. And Young with Carolina, maybe the worst team in the league right now. There again, how do you separate what Bryce Young is doing and what's going on around him? So we still got a long way to play on these three guys, but history will tell us that a couple of these, unfortunately, it's not going to pan out.
We've heard a lot about the Tush Push, right, in Philadelphia. They seem to do it. Troy Aikman made the comment last night when Dallas had a 4th and 1 and they went for it, tried to get a quarterback sneak, and they didn't get it. Chargers stopped him. And he said, I don't know what it is. He was being serious when he said it. He says, I don't know what it is. Philadelphia seems like they almost have a patent on this thing. Every time they go for it, 3rd or 4th and a yard or 2, they always seem to get it. Now, of course, they don't always, but it certainly feels that way. Should that be addressed?
Well, first off, people will start to catch up with it as they do. Secondly, Jalen Hurst, Lamar Jackson's a tailback playing quarterback. Okay, Jalen Hurst is a fullback playing quarterback. I mean, that's a big, powerful man. So that adds to it as well. I mean, he's a big part of that push as well. And I'm surprised more and more people don't do it, and more teams are now going to adjust to it and say, okay, well, this is what you're going to do. This is how we're going to configure it. So you'll start to, I think, even see Philadelphia evolve to where they're going to show that tush push, and then they're going to go off to the edge or toss the ball out. They're going to some variations to it. I think there's some legitimate questions the league has to look at. Do we want to allow this? You didn't used to be able to push from behind. You couldn't aid a running back, a ball carrier that way, worried about injury. We take the center, the nose tackle can't line head up on a long snapper, right, for injury purposes.
Yep.
Not that there's been injuries from this, but I think that's something the league might want to look at and say, I don't know, is this really safe? And is this something that we want to legislate a little bit? But right now, you're right, Philadelphia sure makes it work. And everybody else, you see everybody doing it more and more with varying degrees. A lot of it has to do with the fact you don't have a stud like Jalen Hurst in there pushing.
Last thing I want to ask you about is the Jets, because I find them to be a fascinating team. I really do, because their defense is unbelievable how good they are. I mean, they got players everywhere. They won the game the other night, and their best corner, maybe the best corner in the league, Sauce Gardner, didn't play in the game. But they're having to go with Wilson. Where do you think how do you think they end up getting through this thing, and can they make a push with Wilson as a starter? Because, look, everybody and his brother wanted to run this guy out of town.
Right. Well, we're going to find out. So, like the conversation we just had, he is a capable player, okay? It has not shown up yet, and that's got to be a concern. You're right. With the defense that they have, their ability, again, you got to come back, your ability to run the ball. That's part of the combination. It's not a matter of just playing great defense, and is that good enough? When we had all those great defenses in Baltimore, we also carried a pretty good running game. So that was not that the defense wasn't, great on its own, but that running game's a factor as well. And that helps facilitate a great defense. I don't know that the Jets have that great running game. I mean, they're in the bottom quarter of the league in rushing offense. And so that would certainly help a Wilson as well. Is he good enough, as they were contending to do, obviously, with Aaron Rodgers saying, okay, with this defense and Aaron Rodgers, that combination is going to put us in that elite status. And it might very well have been. I think they're going to continue to be a good team. I think they'll be a factor. Are they good enough to make a run with Wilson? It's not that he can't. It's just that he hasn't so far.
Okay, fair enough. Brian, we appreciate your time. It's great to see you, buddy. Welcome back.
All right, man.
And, man, you look great. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
All right, Brian Billick, boy, sharp as ever.